Welcome to The Legal File. My name is Charles Parselle. I'm very excited today to welcome, really, I think, the most distinguished panel of guests that I've ever had on this show before. All of them are mediators, and they have all most fascinating stories to tell, all of them highly distinguished in the field here in Los Angeles. I'm going to introduce, first of all, Kathryn Marshall. Hello, Kathryn.
Hi. Nice of you to have me, Charles.
It's a pleasure to have you. Now, I know that right now you're working for an environmental law firm, is that right?
Yes, I am.
How do you like that?
I like it very much. It's a very interesting field, and we work a lot with the governmental entities in the field.
What is your experience of mediation?
My experience in mediation started many years ago when I was in law school during a divorce, and I was fascinated with conflict resolution. And I made it a goal, and I started to mediate before I even had passed the bar, and found that the human theater, I came out of a film major background from UCLA, and an entertainment family, and a Time Inc. family of life photographers, and the human theater, the ability to really understand people and absorb and help them was a very big goal of mine. So.
Well, I'm sure you have some fascinating tales to tell, which I'm going to give you a chance to think about. And I'm going to go right to the other end of the line and introduce an old friend of mine, Brian Ghiglia.
Hi, Charles.
Nice to see you, Brian. You've been a lawyer since a long time before the flood. So, but now you're in mediation. So how does this all work together?
Well, first of all, I don't know if I can stand up to that fine introduction you gave us all, but I'll try. But after practicing law about 30 years, I closed my office 2 years ago, but I'd started mediating about 5 or 6 years before that. And I just, like I think a lot of us, it was just something that felt right, that I loved to do. And so I'm doing it. And I do generally just about everything but family law, and certain other areas like intellectual property, but a lot of business partnerships, personal injury cases, serious injury cases.
Right. Well, that's very fun. Well, we're not all lawyers here, which I'm very glad about, because as you know, there's a joke which says, "What do you call it when 10,000 lawyers march off a cliff?"
A good start.
A good start. But we're fortunate to have here today somebody who's not a lawyer at all, but who has received from the President of the United States a Lifetime Achievement Award. Peggy Barnes. Hello, Peggy. Thanks for coming.
Mm-hmm. Now I have to live up to that.
Now you do, yes. Say something terrific.
Well, let's see. I mediate employment mediations, consumer mediations. Consumer has to do with just about anything somebody would buy. Could be a car that turned out to be a lemon car. It could be a real estate sale that the house didn't turn out the way they wanted, or even construction where the swimming pool ends up lopsided, or
Charles,
dentures are lopsided, but I've never had a dentures one yet.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to know about a presidential award, because obviously she must bring that to the table, whatever she got that for in her mediations. I just was curious about that.
I agree. Popular demand, please.
Tell us about that, please?
Yeah, well, basically, I come from a social work background and a counseling background, and I've done a lot of volunteer work in different areas, like New Era Seniors. I'm on their board, and I've worked on a project in India. My main interest is human rights and civil rights, right? And so last year in November, I was awarded a Volunteer Achievement Award from the President for the work that I'd done during my lifetime, and I was very shocked and pleased, and so
Very nice.
that was
But
about.
what were you doing? I still don't, you were volunteering in India. What were you, working in neighborhoods or?
Well, with the, I've done a lot of things over my life, and it all kind of came together. But in the India, I'm working with a priest over there. That's a long story.
Okay, well.
That's a long story, but it's somebody that I knew from way back in graduate school.
Well, I'm going to
And then-
introduce
yes.
my final guest, and then hopefully you'll think of a most fascinating tale to
Okay.
tell us all. Now, my final guest is a man of whom it is said, no panel is complete without him. Glenn Gottlieb, your first time on this panel, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure, Charles.
So why do people think that nothing is ever complete unless you're present?
I can't answer that question. With a personality bigger than life, I suppose. That's very kind of you to say.
We rely on you, Ken.
So you're also in mediation. What brings you to this?
Well, actually, I come to mediation from a slightly different angle. I had heard about a lot of retired judges and burned out litigators becoming mediators. They've been part of the adversary process and decided to take a different path. I'm a business transactional lawyer, and so I negotiate deals for a living, and it occurred to me that maybe I was better suited even to go into the practice because that's all I do is negotiate for a living. And instead of doing it for one party or another as the lawyer, I come in and negotiate for both parties as a mediator. So it's something that's natural to my 30-year law practice as a follow-on.
Thank you. Well, okay. So now we're all stirring the pot on something interesting in the article of stories. So let me start with you, Brow. Tell us a very interesting story about mediation.
Me?
Or if you can't think of one about mediation, about anything.
Well,
Here you go.
as I said, the mediations that I enjoy doing the most are those that have serious life issues, and often are either wrongful death cases or serious injury cases. I think the one mediation that comes to mind was one that actually went 18 hours straight, approximately, and it arose out of the wrongful death of a gentleman and serious injury of 2 other people. And the interesting thing about this case was that it turned out that the deceased gentleman had 2 common law wives and 2 sets of children that were claimants to the proceeds of the settlement. And it was something where the 2 sets of families really didn't get along. So it was an incredible 8 or 9 hours to get a settlement from the insurance companies. And in addition, the defendant was coming with money out of his own pocket because he had been a drunk driver. And so it was a very fascinating case. But once we got all the money on the table, we found out that some of these children of the deceased were very street smart and knew that if they did not agree on a way to divide up the proceeds, they were going to throw a wrench into the whole settlement. But it was a fascinating event that went on, and there were times when everybody wanted to end that mediation because it was going on so long, but everybody decided to continue through the night, and we ended up with a settlement.
That's quite a thing to do 18 hours. Hard for the mediator. Kathryn, have you thought of something? It's hard. I was going to say it's hard on the mediator because the mediator is the only one who never can take a break.
Exactly.
So you need a bit of stamina to do 18 hours straight.
Well, Charles, I did mention the human theater aspect of it that has always intrigued me. And one particular mediation comes to mind where people have a loss of faith that becomes a very important part of understanding the case you're sitting in front of. And oftentimes it may even have a more of an ethnic basis and a cultural basis. And with many of the mediations we do find that we have people from many mixed cultures with issues. And one that comes to mind is I was given a mediation where some precious metals had been sold for the manufacturing of an entity. And the person that had sold this for probably close to $500,000 was never paid. And the store closed down and had no recourse. And it's in an industry where most of the work is done on a handshake, an agreement, and not on written contracts. But one of the workers that had been in the original business remained, and that person's daughter had been listed, unbeknownst to the worker, as the president of the organization in the corporate, California corporate website. And so this person that had lost the money liened her house, and it's not that hard to get a lien, apparently, and would not let it up until he was paid. And there was no culpability on the worker's part or the daughter's part, but the house was now had a large lien on it. And what we discovered was, in speaking with him, that he had a tremendous loss of faith because he thought he was the only person that had ever lost money to this person that had come in. And the attorney on the other side said, well, no, he isn't even the one that lost the most. And I was able, in separate rooms, to begin to put the story together. And the value that came out of that was how to repair this person's loss of faith, how to get information out onto the street and the industry of a success in this lawsuit without harming anyone, and getting the names of people that had continued to do business with this entity that had taken his money, and get the money trail. So over a time where this had started off as a very large case, and you could see how expensive it was going to be if they tried it, and that ultimately at the end of the line, the court would not have found the daughter in any way culpable, but you would have spent at least $24,000 or more in legal fees trying to defend her, and the other side would have in pursuing it. We were able to bring it back to a small settlement, which then word was going to go out that something had been settled, and the names of the contacts for where the money was flowing were going to be given. And he had this understanding that he wasn't the only one, and he could walk with dignity back into his business. And you can never have gotten that in a court.
No, because this whole issue of face, which comes up quite a lot, never gets addressed in a courtroom at all. Very interesting story. Have you found that these intangibles, other than money, such as face, have played a part or important factors?
I don't think there's any question about it. I handled a case recently where a CEO was being terminated from a company, and as tempers started to rise and the emotions started to get big, it appeared to me when we started the mediation that the emotional issues had far outstripped the financial issues as being important to the parties. And what's great about mediation is you can sort of break that cycle a little bit. When you separate the parties and start talking to them, you can get beyond the emotional issues and find out really what's at stake in terms of being able to resolve between the parties what's going on. In fact, in that particular case, it was a long one like Brian's. It went about 12 hours, but they were able to finally break through that and talk to me about what they really wanted to get, and it turned out they were really much more reasonable than either party thought they were when they were talking together, because communication had broken down because of these other emotional issues. So when we were able to get below it and find out what they really wanted, it turned out that each side was being able to be far more reasonable, and we were able to get a settlement. After the case, the attorneys for the company said to me, when we came in here, I didn't give you a 2%, I didn't give you a 1% chance, exactly. I gave you a 0% chance of being able to resolve this case. So, sometimes we talk about mediator magic, how we're able to make these things happen, and often it's just by providing that type of environment in which they can really talk to somebody without feeling as though they have to posture, and they can get beyond a lot of the emotional issues.
It's very interesting that you should talk about the emotional side, because a lot of it's about money, and I've always thought it's legitimate to spend money, which you are doing in a court case, to make money, or to spend money to save money, but once you get on the emotional side and people start spending money to resolve an emotional problem, it can never work.
All bets are off, yeah.
All bets are off, and it can get horribly expensive. So, Peggy, what do you find interesting?
What do I find interesting? Well, I have a new project I'm starting that I find very interesting, because I'm taking from my background and things that I know about and putting it all together. And it's a program for minors who've gotten in trouble with the law and misdemeanors, either first or second offense. And there's a similar program that's available in some of the schools with the very, very, very highest crime rate. but I want this kind of mediation to be available for other children. And what it is, it's like called victim offender mediation, and it's making a space where the parents come and the child and the victim, they all have to be willing to participate. And it gives the child a chance to admit what he did and come clean and have the other person that, say, shoplifting or something, hear him out. And
Or her, of course.
Of course. Good point, good point.
But it mostly, yeah.
And so, and then on the other side, the victim has a chance to say how this affected them, right? And then the ideal thing is that they come up with a resolution of an amends type of project that can be done, that the child can do, that the victim agrees would be restitution for the crime, and then so they can both put it behind them. So that's something that I'm in the process of setting up right now.
Would that be done with the police department?
Yeah, I'm working on that and see how much, because obviously there's benefits just from less guilt and moving on with your life. But if we can get it so that it will take the place of some future actions with the court, that would be even better.
It's interesting that a common thread seems to run through what we do, which is getting people into communication with each other, and sometimes on a very deep level, even in situations that are at first seem quite hard-boiled. I did a mediation quite recently involving a death in a hospital and a very upset relative. The relative asking for enormous amounts of money from the hospital, which really was not at fault. But it wouldn't go away. And they worked on it for a long time before coming to me. I was going to say, having the good sense. I shouldn't say that, should I?
Yes, you should.
So in that aspect, yes, in order to bring people together and in a way teach them how to show some, empathetic understanding of each other's situation, I've had, it's such a huge benefit. The relief is very manifest, and so many of us say, when people say, okay, it's done, it's over, that this sense of relief that fills the room is quite palpable. Do you find that?
Yes, absolutely.
At least 4 of us here have done court cases. We don't find that.
No, actually, in court cases, I find quite to the contrary. In my opening speech to the parties, often I reflect that I can't tell them how many times I've been in court and the jury files back and gives a verdict to one party or the other, and actually the expression on the face of the winning party will be more relief than it is exultation. Not like a criminal case where the person is set free and they're joyous and their family hugs them. In a civil case where money's involved, I find often there's this sense of relief and even disappointment because they've had to go through this very difficult process to get what they thought they were entitled to, but at the end, it's not quite as much vindication as you might expect, even when they win the case.
Well, it's a very arcane system. And I don't think, I often open a mediation and refer to a wonderful quote from Richard Pryor, which is, there is no justice, there's just us. And once you sort of breach that idea that you can think about yourself and the empowerment that you have in the room, and that the answer is in the room, and we're here to find it. I don't tend to mediate with the parties in the same room. It is not a very satisfactory thing for most people because you really don't get the story that you need to reframe as well. And it can amp it up because you spend a lot of time just like you have fighting children, even if they're corporations. So I think it's, I don't know how you work, Charles, but do you work with them in the same room, or do you?
It all depends. If it's a divorce, they kind of have to be in the same room. But generally, I keep them in separate rooms of mix and match. If they have to go, I'm willing to orchestrate the whole show, have them come in and see each other, go away again.
Right.
And I've had 2 experiences recently where the claimant refused. The claimant said, "I'm here to talk." Well, actually, lots of them say, "I'm here to be understood." But these 2 were really serious. They didn't want any money. After they'd said, I really was here to speak my piece, and I'm not here to get money, presents a problem for the defense side. The defense side needs to get a release and a settlement. They say, "Well, we have to pay you money." Well, if the claimant's not asking for any money, the defense has to decide whether to be generous or niggardly. My experience this doesn't happen very often, but my experience has been that if it's genuine, they are generous. Because having received a generous gesture, it seems very low, then to nickel and dime them and say, "Well, we'll give you $100. No, it doesn't work that way. Have you ever had that kind of experience or something similar?
Oh, I had a case involving some Hispanic parties. It was actually very interesting, where it happened to be a real estate broker and a family he was trying to sell a house for, and he had found a purchaser for the home, and in the middle they busted the deal, and he wanted to get his commission because he had rightfully found a purchaser. After we went on for, it must have gone on for 6 or 7 hours, and finally the gal who was representing the family that was selling the home said, "Let me just talk to him. Would that be okay? Can I just talk to him?" I said, "Well, do you want me present there or not?" She said, "No, just the 2 of us and you can be in the room." So we got them together, and they started speaking to each other in Spanish, and I, having grown up in California, have a reasonable working knowledge, but not nearly, when they're really speaking to each other in colloquial and so forth. So I was able to follow sort of part of it. And so they spoke for about 10 minutes, and finally the broker turned to me and said, "Okay, it's done, we've agreed." And I said, "Okay, you want to let me in on what you both agreed to?" And he had agreed to cut his commission in half, and they had worked it out between themselves. And it was the same thing. She had given him more of the reasons why this whole thing had come out, and said it would be a real hardship on them to have to pay the commission when they hadn't actually sold the house, and he agreed to a compromise.
Do you find that that we sometimes provide that safe haven
Absolutely.
for those discussions, and it really it's part of the facilitator part of it, but the ability to absorb the emotional side, to be able to validate. Everyone has their own take on reality. They need to know that they can own it and it's okay. And then you move them into giving a perspective of someone else and give them that safety to be able to consider it without losing.
And that sort of leads me to the topic that I find so fascinating, is that we sort of look at ourselves in the study of what we're doing, because I find that my wheels are always turning and I'm always reacting internally to what's going on and making sure that my ego doesn't get in the way. There's sometimes when it's like, hey, you have to shut up here, or you have to let the process work. And I find that fascinating, because every single case is different as to how you're going to deal with the folks.
I agree. Have you actually been in India yourself, Peggy?
Have I been to India?
In India, yeah.
No.
So, because I was going to ask you because we just got into a bit about how very different nationalities and backgrounds and ethnicities are, that they respond to conflict in quite different ways. Have you experienced that at all?
I haven't. My work in India has not been mediation. Yeah. It's been more on the human rights. And, yeah.
Oh, okay. So has anyone had that experience that I was talking about?
Yeah, I had a case, and the parties were represented, and it was a boundary dispute between 2 neighbors, and there was an allegation by one neighbor that he had put a fence over in the other fellow's property, and I didn't really think there was much chance to settle this claim, and very similar to what you discussed, and these folks happen to be from the Mideast. I forget which country, but the point is that at the end of the day, when they had moved to this neighborhood, they didn't know each other, and then they had become friends and established a lot of trust, and had actually had dinner at each other's homes and everything. And then when this dispute arose, it was like a world war was going to break out, and halfway through the mediation, the 2 people finally went in the other room without attorneys, without anybody, And there was a lot of screaming and shouting in there for a long time, and they came out and they had settled the case. I think that's just an example. Yeah, that wouldn't be my style, but that certainly was their cultural style to get the deal done.
It's interesting, and I've also had that experience, although I like to be in the room. Well, just so as to watch. But I find the very hard thing is to persuade the attorneys not to be in the room, because the attorneys will always interfere, because they have a job to do, and I'm completely sympathetic. I'm an attorney myself, but where you get two individuals in the room, then all you're doing is you're kind of a silent umpire and just letting it happen. Then you see, I'm thinking of one particular situation where they also yelled at each other for about 25 minutes. I was quite enjoying it. The only thing I was frightened of is that the door would open and someone
And the
would come in.
process would get interrupted.
It would get interrupted. But at the end of that time, it was, the anger rolled up to a pitch, and then it rolled down, and then they got up, shook hands, and it was over. And it was a lovely thing.
I find also particularly in Asian communities, sometimes I've mediated disputes among Koreans, Japanese, and I find sometimes they even have a little bit of a formalized process that they need to go through, a little dance, as it were, before, and if it doesn't follow that process, it's difficult for them to find their way to a resolution. So if you can sort of step out of the way and allow them to go through that process,
then you've got a done deal. We've almost got a done deal now. So say 10 words. This is your last chance to be on TV, starting with Kathryn.
I think that it's a ritualistic process with mediation. I think it's an amazing process to participate in, and I hope to continue to use it in every aspect of what I do.
Thank you. Glenn.
Well, I used to quote, what was it, the Winston Churchill quote about democracy being the worst of all possible forms of government, except for all the others.
Yes.
And I used to say the same thing about our justice system. It's the worst way of resolving disputes except for all the others. And I've really become a firm believer in mediation, that I think it really is a far better way of resolving disputes and much more satisfying for the parties at the end of the day
That's
than
more
going
than
to
10
trial.
words.
There we go, Peggy.
Sorry.
If you want to say a few words, it's got to be really quick.
Oh, okay. I think that mediation, bottom line, takes a lot of common sense, and that is, you can have lots of different theories and different ideas, but be able to use them with the people right in front of you. Common sense.
Very good point. Finally, Brian.
I'll be very brief. Just explore it, look at it. If you're in a case, talk to your attorneys about mediation. It's a great option.
Thank you all for coming very, very much. I didn't exaggerate at the beginning. I think everyone who watches this show will agree. They are all brilliant. They know what they're doing. It's been a wonderful time with you, and we hope to do it again soon. This has been The Legal File with Charles Parselle. I'd like to say goodbye to Brian Ghiglia, Peggy Barnes, Glenn Gottlieb, Kathryn Marshall. Thanks a lot. See you next time.